I'm afraid I'm balancing two laptops on a table that's only big enough for one. So if you hear a crash, it'll be because they've fallen off the table. Okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello. We're just waiting to start. So we've lost our chief executive. Oh, there we are. Morning, Julian.
Morning, Martin.
I think we're all here. So if I may, we'll get started. Welcome to everyone. I suppose the really nice thing we want to record is the delight we have that Julian was awarded OBE in the New Year's Honours. A fantastic achievement, Julian, and absolutely deserved. So enjoy. Congratulations. I know you're a very modest man, and I know that you'll say everybody else is contributed. I'm sure they did, but it's the leadership which in this case is being respected. So thank you very much for what you've done. Well deserved. Okay. Any public questions, Julie?
No public questions.
No public questions. Apologies.
Yeah, we've got apologies from Aileen and from Minu, and Nav is deputising for Minu.
Okay, welcome, Nav. Okay, Directorate of any other business or interest? No. Okay, minutes of the meeting on the 12th of November, any corrections? No. Action log, so I could see it's all in hand unless someone wants to raise anything. No, okay. In which case, item 6, quality board story, speech and language therapist court diversion service. Debbie, you're going to introduce your colleagues?
I will let them introduce themselves, but Pauline
right.
and Kate are here. I thought it would be a bit interesting to see how we use speech and language therapy. It wouldn't be traditionally used in a court divert service to support particularly neurodivergent learning disabilities and those that find written and verbal communication really tricky, and that impacts on their journey through court. So it's a little quite a new, relatively new service into court divert. Certainly wouldn't have been traditionally thought about, so I thought it'd be a bit interesting to hear about that. So I'm going to hand over to, I don't know, Kate or Pauline to share the presentation and walk us through it.
Well, I'm going to allow Kate to do this very much so because she is the expert and she is a speech and language therapist. But I'm purely here in support of Kate because I know how scary you guys are. I'm joking. But I'm here if she needs some support.
Welcome to you both. Kate, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen with you. Can you all see that okay?
Yeah, can you make it sort of cool? That's it. Perfect.
Perfect. Lovely. Yes, so we're going to talk about speech and language therapy, as you said. One of the words that's missing is that it's very exciting, it's new, it's fresh, it's a different way of thinking and putting a traditional sort of health service into a different department, which is exciting. So I come from the Hampshire and Isle of Wight liaison diversion team, but we are obviously under the Berkshire umbrella. It confuses everybody that we work in Portsmouth, but we are under Berkshire NHS. And we obviously have our Berkshire team that covers the Thames Valley. So an innovation for speech and language was discovered because we are an all vulnerability, all ages services, and quite often we get tarred, if you like, with being the mental health service. We help people with housing. We have good links with the drug and alcohol team. But a big area that was missing was people's communication being a vulnerability when they're coming through the criminal justice system. So just a couple of slides on the prevalence of speech and language. So it's just widely accepted and obviously evidence-based that people within the criminal justice setting have a much higher proportion of speech and language communication needs. For young offenders or children in custody, at least 60% is where the figure is for suggesting we have speech language communication needs, and approximately 1/3 of 10 to 17-year-olds have language levels of less than an 11-year-old, which obviously hinders them from accessing education and justice treatment programs. And then with the adults, we've got 79 to 84%, which is just a huge number to think about. In one study, the below average speech and language communication was found in almost 40%. And along with that, they had substance misuse and anger management, which stopped them accessing substance misuse and anger management courses. So within our Berkshire team in Thames Valley is where this started. So speech and language was introduced and it had a really positive impact. A pilot study was identified or was created, and so speech and language was looked at. So the referral numbers were looked at, and then they found out that from that it had the prevalence to be able to employ another speech and language therapist. So there were 2 now working in Thames Valley and just the 1 over here in Hampshire. So following the success of the pilot study in Thames Valley, it's now expanded over to Hampshire, and we're in the process of setting up our speech and language therapy service. So thinking about why in the criminal justice system is it needed, this is just a quote here, but is that the police custody setting is one of the most challenging environments for any person to experience. And then if you factor in the communication requirements, you can understand it's massive. So part of that, if you're being interviewed by the police, you have to give evidence. You have to understand the process, understand the information, tell your story, arrange it in the correct order, be prepared to explain and justify complex and abstract concepts such as intent, motivation, and decision making. So it's a very complicated area. This is something we've created. It's nice and colourful, so it's a bit brighter than just the normal quotes that I've been given. So if we start at the bottom, if somebody is completely non-verbal and has no words, we can look at their behaviour and their emotions to find out how somebody might be or what somebody might be communicating. How is that individual presenting? And so these questions underneath is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's something that we're asking our custody practitioners at the minute to think about when they're doing their assessments. So who traditionally have got a different background from speech and language, this will structure their thinking, if you like, to try and identify whether there is a speech and language need. So for the attention listening, is that person able to focus, sustain concentration? Are there too many environmental distractions, noises, colours, posters on the walls? Could be a ticking clock, that often gets most of us. Their understanding, can the individual understand their situation? Do they require shorter, more simple language? Do they need additional processing time? Can they even read? What would visuals support them to understand? So by visuals, we can mean pictures, we can mean symbols, could be interpretive dance, even just a different way other than verbal language. For their expression, can the person communicate their needs and wants? So this could be writing. Do they need pictures to communicate? Can they speak? What are they saying and doing socially? With this speech, is the person intelligible? And then fluency, can the person put sentences together without stammering? Is their fluency impacted? So just some examples we've got. And then as a little case study, it's not long. So the examples, if we have a 10-year-old child who's been arrested, and I've used 10 for obviously the age of them being able to be arrested, do they know the following words? So think of your average 10-year-old: processing, solicitor, liaison and diversion, NHS even, indecent images of minors, bailed with conditions. None of these words mean anything, and so being able to interpret that into sort of a more accessible format for them is something we're thinking about for the children in custody. The next example, we have a man with reduced cognition being required to sequence events of what's happened. So imagine somebody just to put into maybe with an early dementia or something like that, being then asked to sequence events and how it happened firstly, secondly, and then what happened before that, what happened, and then what happened. We see police interviews, even if you just see them on the telly, you should get an idea that they can be quite intense. And then this, what a person is being saying is that is their account. And so that is what will go with them through to court. So it's quite important that we understand whether they can understand time concepts. The next one we have is a young woman who's known for being a frequent attender as a child, so in and out of custody settings or in and out of the court settings, whose offences are escalating, so getting worse and worse. She has a stammer. And the reason I've put the word stammer in there is because we think about the stigma that a child, then a teenager, might go through if they have a stammer. They do things to be popular, they do things to be accepted, and then they don't want to stand out as a stammerer, and so they carry on and fall into this crime circle, is what we'll call it. However, if that person could have been diverted to maybe a stammering support group, or could be in touch with peers at a much younger age, or could understand that a stammer is just part of their communication profile and actually part of their identity, but in a good way, almost to own that they have this stammer, potentially they would meet other people like themselves who they could identify with, and they could have been diverted away from this path. Here's quite an in-depth example of a case study. It's my favourite one to talk about, which was a man was brought into Portsmouth custody who has autism and severe learning disabilities. He was non-verbal and lived in a supported living arrangement where he had 2-to-1 carers. We don't really get involved in the offences, but what had happened is he'd hit out and he'd hit one of his carers. So he usually, in that setting, uses something called a picture exchange communication system, which is whereby he will swap a picture to show what his needs and wants are, because he has no words. This wasn't brought into custody with him. And so a man with quite significant needs, quite significant difficulties, was brought into a cell and processed in the absolute same way that everybody else would be, brought up to a desk, asked a lot of questions about his demographic information. Can he confirm his telephone number? Can he confirm his address? Given his rights in a great big passage, he just jumped up and down a lot of times. That he didn't have the awareness of it. He couldn't have his way to express himself. Even if he could understand any of it, he didn't have the means to be able to do that. As we're on all vulnerability services, as I said before, police were encouraged to send a referral to our team. It's a great opportunity to emphasise that our scope goes beyond mental health. So communication is a vulnerability that somebody could have. As this was the primary need in this example, I took the lead on it. So the man appeared to be settled. He was quite happy. He was just bouncing a ball in his room. However, the second I went to the cell to approach him, I opened the door, but opening the door to somebody with a significant learning difficulty suggests, like, come on through, come out. At that point, the police jump up and they want to be they're very much gesturing for him to go and sit back down. You know, no, you're not coming out, sit back down. It was very confusing for this young gentleman. So I was able to use Makaton, and Makaton, for those of you who don't know, is a bit like a sign language. It's much simpler. So I could say to him, sit down, you know, waiting, and he could understand this. I asked him if he wanted to wash his hands. I asked him if he wanted to eat. He could understand all of that. On top of that, I could use visual resources. So I made an easy read for him to say, you know, you're in police custody, you're going to wait here for a few minutes, someone will come and talk to you, and storyboarded his way through what was happening, just to try and increase his communication and understanding. His understanding of his whole situation was improved, and therefore he cooperated much better, sat back down, waited nicely. So we shared our thoughts with the police, which was that he was not suitable to be detained for a number of reasons, but due to his lack of awareness, the insight into his what had happened to him, and his general mental capacity. Throughout the afternoon, the HLDS team supported this individual to have regular snacks, drinks, access to the yard. The easy resource was then created to enhance his understanding of what the next steps were, because although he had no words, he often said, "Go home," because he wanted to go home, which was quite nice. The plan was that the police would take him back to his accommodation, and he doesn't know police car or anything like that. But again, I could use Makaton to say car, and it's good. So then we shared our understanding of the situation during the handover, which raised the aware of the needs for Makaton, and I'll show you a quote in a moment as to why. and visual resources being used routinely in this environment. The police actively sought advice from us on that occasion, and you can hear that we work collaboratively throughout. I like that story. I hope you did too. So the feedback in the handover, one of the police said the first line here, it's like a superpower that you can communicate with him like that. And it isn't. It's just a lack of Makaton training in the police force in that case that they wouldn't have known. If you hadn't been here to explain in that way, physical interventions would have had to be used more. So again, they wouldn't have understood his autism, the jumping up and down. They might have he was a grown man. He would have seen as fairly aggressive. He wasn't listening. All of those misconceptions, which wasn't true. It was just his communication needs, and potentially, yeah, he would have been. Physical interventions would have been used. The old word would have been restrained to make him sit down. And then the social worker after that sent a great card, which was very much thanking the HLDS team for what would have been a very stressful time for this individual. So next steps for speech and language, we're coming up with our pathway within Hampshire. And so we will have an individual referred to the HLDS team using the standard form that they've got. However, we are seeking to add speech language communication needs as one of the tick boxes to highlight that it is a vulnerability, but also to make sure that the police are considering it quite actively as what could be the primary need. And then obviously it helps us to triage. We'll then do an assessment. We will do a communication passport, which I'm hoping is just going to be one piece of A4 paper, which will then have the prevalent needs and best ways to support that person if they come through custody. And again, this will help with their future arrests. If going to court, a more thorough assessment would be carried out, and so then a report would be made with reasonable adjustments that could be considered by the courts. We're going to continue working with partner agencies to support. So earlier I used the stammering group as an example. That would be something we could give leaflets out for, and to particularly our children in custody. And then something we need to do. So before I could only give you feedback on what the police said and what the social worker said, because what we need to do is look into the best ways to gain service user feedback from people with speech and language communication needs, because our current questionnaire might not be accessible for them. So this is our current working plan. Standard. Thank you for listening. Any questions? And if anyone ever wants to come and visit us at HLDS in either of our areas, we're very accommodating and welcoming. So yeah, get in touch, please.
Okay, thank that absolutely fabulous presentation. Really interesting too. Mark.
Hey, thanks ever so much for that presentation. It was fascinating, particularly some of the statistics that you were providing to us there were really quite surprising and shocking to me in terms of the high prevalence of need. The one bit that I'm a little bit unclear on is that when a young person is arrested, who undertakes that initial assessment to determine whether they should be referred to yourself and your team for support or not?
We have 3 groups really, which are women, veterans and children that are mandatory referrals. And so just whoever checks their age would get a trigger a referral to us, and that's how it's done. The assessment obviously would be done by our HLDS practitioners. So we are a multidisciplinary team: speech therapy, mental health nurses, social workers. So we would have a look at that and see who could then, we do have child-specific practitioners. So although any of our practitioners can see anybody of any age, we have 2 now that in Hampshire that are specific for our children.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sally.
A very interesting case study. I mean, this may be a statement of the obvious, but it would seem to me that there must be training for police when they're dealing with people with learning disabilities or perhaps dementia. And it does sort of alarm me that they would have somebody with severe learning disabilities they would then sort of try and restrain. They would see it as a sort of an aggressive response rather than the sort of response of somebody with severe learning disabilities. And you're obviously a really specialist team, and you can't be everywhere, but it must raise training issues for someone with severe LD to be in that situation.
I think it was something that was quite shocking that a lot of people hadn't heard of Makaton. Off the back of that, we're hoping to make links with the police newsletter, for instance, to have a sign of the month or a sign of the week, however often it comes out. Regular training. We're on the police training program, and we do train the detention officers when they're, and the sergeants, but when they're coming through. I think unfortunately or unfortunately, it's a lot of speech people with severe learning disabilities don't come through very regularly. And yeah,
No.
do you want to jump in there, Pauline?
Yeah, would you mind if I just add something as well? It's not typical, thankfully, you know, that we would see individuals with such level of learning disability and level of speech needs, but nonetheless, it does occasionally happen. Unfortunately, some social situations are created or happen where the police do need to get involved, and actually the person is quite volatile, and obviously they need to make the situation safe, and you have families who are at the end of their they just don't have that resilience anymore, or they're not able to cope. And equally, we have situations where care homes will not accept the individual back, and quite often we do intervene and recommend to the police that they don't accept an individual into custody. But it thankfully it doesn't happen that often. But when it does, obviously in this instance, you can see where it can go not the direction that you want it to go, and I think in this example that Kate gave, without that additional support with communication, yeah, sadly the need for potentially physical intervention would have escalated.
Yeah, it was the only safe place, but it must be the extreme example to put somebody like that in a cell.
Yeah.
But anyway, I won't belabor the point. Thank you.
Excuse me.
No, that is true, and it was stressful, and it was one of those whereby, because he had assaulted one of his carers, that he was 2 to 1. They didn't have the ratio to have him back, and so he was almost getting to the level where he's being unlawfully detained because he couldn't go home, but equally we can't keep him if he hasn't done something that needs prosecuting, and so we being the police in that example. So yeah, it was difficult, and it was good to be able to then get him some crisps and a drink and take him outside, you know.
Very good, thank you. Julian.
Thanks. Good morning, Kate. Nice to see you again. I just had a thought, really. The team's big. When I met you just before sort of Christmas, you filled a sort of room. You're the only speech and language therapist. They're in short supply, so we've got quite a lot of vacancies across the trust because they're much in demand. Thinking about the success of this, because obviously what you've presented was really powerful. What do you think the team and Pauline and others need to do to make sure that if you are going to have speech and language therapists, they stay and can be impactful? So perhaps less thinking about the interaction with the police, but the sort of team, and what have you had to do to make sure that as the lone voice, you're not isolated or...
No, fortunately, I've got a very loud voice. I think I'm a bit of a foghorn in the team, so that's handy. I was employed as the speech and language therapist in September, but I've actually gained a promotion to become one of our managers, which is very manipulative of me, really, because it makes a speech therapy vacancy. So I've doubled us in 6 weeks. The post has to be one of our sort of senior speech therapy roles because of the vulnerability, because of the amount of autonomous working and sort of complexity, I suppose, of the post, which means that when somebody is employed as a band 7, if you know bandings, then they tend to stay because it's generally when they've set up their home. So as much as it's hard to recruit to those posts, generally when someone's employed, they do stay for a long amount of time. It's new, this job. Like we said, it was created for, well, not for me, but it was created and then I filled it. But it's a really exciting post to be able to set up a service, to be able to come and talk to you, to spread the word. It's outside of, like I said, the typical healthcare role. And I think so when you find that person that's got that passion behind them to change, to make influence, that person will stay, I think. So it's just about getting them. So we have tomorrow there is a masterclass on how to recruit to more challenging posts, which I'll be attending, and so hopefully we can implement that as well. Our team, I think, of health professionals understands the need for speech and language, and so all of them so far have been on board with working. They just want it up and running yesterday. And so hopefully just keeping up with that momentum should be enough to keep the team driving forwards and then keep sharing.
Thanks, Kate. Lovely. Great presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations.
Naomi.
Yes, thank you, Kate. A fantastic service, and actually, just by extension, around Julian's inquiry, I just wanted to zoom out with you a little bit and look at this from the perspective of England more broadly. You know, this is you have created a standard of service, which is, you know, in all likelihood in the good to great category. Do you have any observations to make around how this kind of service might be deployed in other trusts? And is there an opportunity to learn from each other through that lens?
Yes, so as much as I'm the first in Hampshire, we're not the first speech therapist in the whole of the country. There is a few of us, and by a few, I'm thinking about 12. So that's we are small. However, we have a learning and development network that meets monthly, which joins those speech and language therapists together. It's great because we all have slightly different takes, slightly different geographical areas of what the pressing need is. Some of us work quite a lot in custody, whereas some have trialed, even Thames Valley trialed it in more into the community. So people are trying to figure out how it fits and what's best. Resource sharing is something we're massively trying to do at the minute. So we feel like we need a dictionary, if you like, of easy read terms to try and explain some of these, even the offences. You know, you've been arrested for a fray, you know, well, what is that? Whereas if we could put things like a fray, GBH and assault just with a visual of like violence next to it, they could say, when you hear these words, they're talking about something you did, whether it was hitting, you know, and really trying to simplify it down. I think something we need to do more is working with the courts. I know something that one of my colleagues, Carrie's, really passionate about, because training to judges and magistrates would be another avenue we can go down here. Some of their language is quite formal, and actually that it's not accessible either. Somebody said somebody was denied their medication, a different person that came from one prison to another, and then they had to stand court for 5 days, and the judge addressed them and said, "Oh, I understand this affects your attention. You know, it's quite extraordinary what's happened to you. However, quite literally, it's not extraordinary because it happens far too ordinarily. And so therefore, and you know, are we free to proceed?" And I thought none of those words meant anything to this individual. Yet their freedom, I suppose, is at stake of getting this wrong. Yes. So, yes,
lots of opportunity out there for continuous improvement, right? I'm so glad we've got you, Kate.
Thank
Truly.
you.
Can I just add as well that I think any opportunities for us to be able to showcase some of that work that we're doing to kind of promote the opportunities to grow that part of the service, I think is widely beneficial. But like Kate was saying, you know, to be able to access into other liaison and diversion services across England is huge. And I think that we are making very new inroads that are different to other areas that actually is promoting that need for that greater knowledge of speech and language awareness across the criminal justice system. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, Kate, as you can tell, it's a really gripping issue, and I must admit, I was just reflecting on, you know, this wider issue that Naomi talked about across the country, you know, and being more visible about these issues. Because I suspect, you know, whilst one might sort of think about them a bit, we don't really understand, the layperson doesn't really understand the nature, but when you've explained it the way you've explained it, it's very, very clear to everyone, and it's a real worry that, you know, some people are not getting the support they need. Look, thank you very much for what you're doing. Please pass on our thanks to your colleagues, and Pauline, thank you too, and a great presentation. So we'll let you go, Kate, if that's all right.
Yes, no, you're more than welcome, and enjoy the rest of your morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. Bye.
Well, I thought that was a fantastic presentation. Really interesting. Okay, we must move on, however. Item 7, executive report. Julian, anything you want to particularly highlight, or just questions?
No, it might be some questions. I mean, there's a few things, Martin. The detail is yet to be sort of determined. I suspect next board meeting is going to be sort of quite pivotal. For example, Paul, I suspect, will be doing quite a detailed presentation on the planning guidance, which is getting put together. But just reading, say, for example, item 3, the elective recovery plan, you can see this is going to create a level of complexity for integrated care boards in terms of rewiring the financial system without actually then making other things fall over. Because it's easy to do one thing, but it's obviously the unintended consequences, and I think that's going to be sort of quite a challenge. The other thing is that I guess is encouraging, although we don't know how it will be deployed, is the mental health investment standard has been retained. West Streeting is sort of committed to that. So we know there's going to be a smaller number of priorities. We know elective recovery is right in the spotlight there, and we'll give Paul the enviable task of sort of simplifying the planning guidance. Hopefully by next month, I'm hoping we'll have got it by then. But at the moment, obviously this announcement, Martin, has created a sort of understandable complexity in terms of then redoing this sort of financial sort of planning and then the guidance associated with it. So the guidance is not yet out.
Could you just help us a bit more with the timescale? Because there's this guidance come out. There's a 10-year plan, which is this part of the same 10-year plan? This is an addition
No,
to
Martin. Let's separate. That's helpful. Yeah, let's separate the two things. The 10-year plan is going to be inevitably quite high level, particularly in years 5 to 10. That is due to be published in May, and is not the planning guidance. The planning guidance, if you like, is the tactical 25-26. Beg my pardon. 25-26 sort of operational plan for the NHS.
Okay.
So obviously they're going to be cognizant of each other, and the 10-year plan is clearly going to have that commitment that we return to the 18-week wait for 92% of sort of patients by 2029. And that's obviously going to be in the plan. This year's planning will be the sort of first rung on the ladder of achieving that. So two different but connected things.
Okay. Any other questions, issues? Okay, in which case, thanks so much, Julian. I think we're now on to finance. Month 8.
Thanks, Martin. I guess we're heading into the final months of the year. I think the finance report doesn't really reflect any significant changes from what we've been saying over previous months. We're in a pretty stable position. We're on track year to date, and we're on track at the moment to deliver our year-end forecast. So results for November year to date, we moved to 1.9 million surplus, which is in line with what we're forecasting at the end of the year. Just a few headlines in terms of workforce. We still remain within budget, and we're still slightly below where we expected to be in terms of full recruitment. So we've got some slippage on investments. We've also got some pretty good controls around non-permanent staffing spend. That underspend has helped to absorb the pressure of the pay award, which is now fully reflected in the position, which we estimate is probably about £1 million compared to the funding that we received. In terms of temporary staffing, we're just over £1 million less than where we were last year in terms of bank spend, and our agency spend is broadly in line with where we expended last year. So again, good controls over temporary staffing position. Agency spend was still operating below NHS's 3.2% target, so we're at 2.9%, and we're continuing to see reducing levels of framework arrangements and reducing number of price cap breaches, which again is really positive. In terms of elective recovery, we're starting to see the position for Frimley improve. The last couple of months we've been close to, if not at target, and we're still over delivering against our baseline targets for Bob. So overall, overachieving. NHSC have raised questions around affordability of elective recovery nationally, and have said they're going to cap elective recovery payments to ICBs this year. We're still waiting for the final detail on that. We don't think it's going to impact on our forecast because we've been pretty consistent with forecasting the level of activity and level of ERF over the course of this year. And we believe those caps are going to be in line with what organisations have forecast. So again, shouldn't be of any concern, but just kind of indicate the national pressure on availability of funding. Placement costs, November saw a reduction in bed numbers from 24 to 19, which was positive, but we did see increase in PICU placements, which obviously are slightly more expensive, and we're continuing to see that pressure through November, December, and into January at the moment. SIPs on track to deliver in line with plan, which is really good. CapEx, with 3 million behind where we originally planned to be in terms of phasing of projects, but we've got a number of IT, so a number of estate programs which are due to complete by the end of the year, and we've got our annual IT equipment replacement order went through in December, so we're not expecting that we will underspend against our agreed ICB capital allocation. POS over at PPH is probably the only material scheme which will now slip into the first quarter of next year, but this is outside of ICB CDL limits, so shouldn't cause an issue for the centre. And then obviously the knock-on to has been slightly behind where we expected to be with capital, is that we're carrying a higher level of cash than we originally forecast at 56 million, but again, that should come back to forecast levels once we expend on the capital programme by the end of this year. Happy to hold it there and take any questions.
Any questions from colleagues? I mean, a pretty good set of numbers, Paul. I just got it's probably my lack of understanding, but if I look at your dashboard summary narrative on page 25 with the green and red highlights, I'm just looking at the SIP identification of schemes. It's got a red under the outturn achieved column and a big difference between 8.8 and 13.6. And yet you seem later on to imply it's all okay. Can you just say a few words about that, just to...
Yeah, I mean, it's the difference between the level of SIPs we need to achieve this year in order to deliver the plan. So because of the performance, we don't need to deliver the 13.6 we've got in the original plan.
Okay.
So we're in line against the level of SIPs we need to deliver the 1.9 surplus this year.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks for that. Naomi.
Yeah, Paul, I probably should know the answer to this, but on elective recovery fund, and this is just really a matter of interest, not a kind of challenging question, but on elective recovery funding, do we have a sense of how much of that money goes to the provision of services or beds outside the NHS, so into the private sector?
So I've not got the number, but we know how much we spend with external providers to achieve our numbers. So we outsource some services like mainly physiotherapy around NSK, which is obviously one of our biggest drivers. The system knows as well in terms of what it's spending with the independent sector. And that's obviously going to form part of the conversations around planning in terms of level of investment into private sector effectively supporting elective recovery going forward.
Yeah, I suppose in a sort of high level strategic sense, you know, I'm sort of supposing that the go forward over the next sort of 3 to 5 years is going to be, the system is going to be highly reliant on the private sector to have capacity to bring down waiting lists and so on. So this might be a highly simplified way of looking at it or thinking about it. And in that case, if that's true, then how much capacity is indeed available in the private sector to absorb that? You know, and I know funding and, you know, the resources and money in particular are going to come into play there to add complexity, but any thoughts?
I think if you look at the elective, well, I think to some degree, if you look at the elective recovery plan that's been published, it's very clear front and centre that they're going to continue to use private sector provision in order to bring their targets down. I guess your point on capacity is quite well noted, given fundamentally, if you look at the medical workforce, it's the same medical workforce across both sectors, which could be a significant limitation on it. But beyond that, I think we just need to wait to see what the plans are for the coming year in terms of what individual providers are able to do towards whatever targets they agree to during the planning process.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Anything else on the finance? Okay, performance month April.
That's me.
Oh, Tamina,
I
sorry.
just-
Forgive me.
that's,
Paul used to
that's
do
all
it.
right.
I Paul used to do it. I'm going back to a previous year.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I just wondered if there were any particular questions or queries people had. I wanted to pull out just a couple of things. I mean, just to notice that falls in community and OPMH wards have been growing for 2 consecutive months, which I think is a really positive sign. I mean, that's been an extremely successful piece of work in any case, but I just wanted to kind of notice that for the board. Although, and I think I've said this before, actually, sometimes when we have performance which is red, it might hide the fact that there has been improvement. So I also wanted to just flag up the new birth visits, which are improving, although we are still red in that area. And the dementia diagnosis rate is still red, although we have seen some sort of improvement there. We do have some volatility. For example, some of our self-harm incidents has seen an increase, but we're also just had a position where our wards are at capacity, and you may have noticed we've had a significant number of out-of-area placements to try and support the level of demand and acuity that we've been experiencing over the last 6 weeks. I would say unprecedented actually for us. We normally see that a little bit early in the year and a bit of a drop off as we come into this period. So our occupancy rate and length of stay is understandably high. So those were the things I just wanted to pull out. But when you've had a chance to look at it, was there anything else that you noted or had any questions on? Sally?
Sally.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the self-harm actually, because it's sort of gone up from the 60s to the 90s, and what the context about that. What I was going to ask you, Tamina, was the restricted practice. I wondered if our target 241, which we adjusted in August, was actually stretching enough, because when you look at the numbers, over the year, we're sort of coming down below that, aren't we? And I know at the same time there's a lot of work that's going on in restrictive practice, and I wondered, at some point whether we should sort of review that and be a bit more challenging for ourselves.
Nav, I'm going to slightly put you on the spot here, and I just wonder, because I'm curious about the conversations that have been held with our consultant colleagues in Prospect Park around that. So clearly we want to have both a stretching target, but also something that's achievable, so that we can maintain the sort of the positivity and encouragement around it. But have you got any thoughts on that now?
That's right. So I think sort of with the restricted practices, we just need to get the balance right, in the sense that we don't necessarily want to reduce the numbers and not deliver the care that we need to, because of course certain patients in certain situations do need restricted practices to be able to manage, whether that's violence, whether that's self-harm, whether there are other things. So I think it is necessary. So what's important is that we don't actually use inappropriate force. So I think it's the inappropriate use of force that's particularly the concern, and that's what needs to be sort of reduced, rather than just reduce it for the sake of the numbers. And I think it's important that the staff, the nursing team on the ward, also feel that they are able to manage difficult situations using appropriate sort of levels of force and kinds of force as well. So I think it's the balance in terms of restricted practices. Yes, I think, and we should, of course, use, but it's just trying to get the balance right as well, I think, which is important.
No, that's really helpful, and I know you can get spikes, because of individual patients, but that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nav.
Any others? I just got a question to me, and it's just sort of a academic question, I suppose. But on the talking therapies, it has things about, I can't remember the wording now, I can't find it on my screen, but about have completed a course of treatment and have got better. I'm sure those are the wrong words. What I was wondering though is, how do you measure that? How do you measure a successful end of treatment for something like talking therapies? Is it just the patients don't re-engage and therefore it's assumed they're okay, or?
No, there's a certain set of criteria. I mean, it's one of the most monitored of all the services that we have. You'll notice that because we have pages and pages of talking therapies data that we're monitored through. So there's a particular set of criteria that we do, and some of it self-reported as well, in terms of how people feel the benefit of the treatment has been. And then also there will be some monitoring about whether they'd re-engaged or not, or whether they'd recontacted us or not.
So there's a sort of proper formal process to,
yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
Martin, just to come on. So yes, so there is a self-assessment and professional assessment at the end of it. There is the sort of compliance with the period of treatment, which is also sort of measured. Did people sort of complete the program? Did they get better as a result of the program? There are also other indicators, for example, now, which is really in the spotlight, which is maintaining sort of employment or return to employment. That kind of thing, and again, it's sort of measurable nationally. There's nothing like it anywhere else in the world in terms of sort of scale. There was a previous sort of a national indicator about the numbers of people coming into the service. There is now much more indicator around successful sort of completion of the service, and that's where the focus needs to be, so that people are actually completing treatment rather than just having 1 or 2 sessions and then coming back, as Tamina says, because they haven't completed.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Okay. Shall we move on then to strategy implementation plan report, Alex?
Thanks, Martin. So these updates are from the leads for the strategy areas and is the midpoint of our 2025 strategy. And as we know, we're going to be reviewing these as part of our refresh over the next few months. In terms of highlights, I'd bring out the health inequalities. So we know we've had mental health act detentions as a focal area around particular race health inequality. We also have our corporate QI program that's picked out through focus some key areas that we have influence over. And we discussed in the board in October to develop further impact in Reading and Slough, where our main areas of deprivation are, and expecting to bring that through to the board as part of our strategy refresh in the next few months. Carbon emissions, we are making carbon emission reductions, and as Paul has highlighted there, we continue to push towards that quite stretching 13% reduction target. Great place to work is the turnover piece, and we report here 12% turnover coming down from a high of over 17% 18 months to 2 years ago, down to a new all-time low for the trust is now about 11.5%. So that 10% target is within reach, it is stretching. We're seeing some good stability in the workforce, and key for us will be recruiting into the key areas of vacancy, which is a focus for us. The improved mental health inpatient services is focused around right sizing for safety, the ward sizes in Prospect Park Hospital, commissioning further capacity to ensure we hit an 18-bed maximum for effective and safe care on our inpatient wards. And the operational excellence area is our continued focus around the productivity challenge, the waiting challenge, making sure we're spreading some good learning for some key services within our divisions. Colleague execs, is there anything else you'd like to say on any of these areas that you are leading on? Otherwise, we can open for questions or comment.
No.
Thank you.
Everyone's silent. Naomi.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. Quick one on the carbon emissions piece. I'm sure there are a bunch of projects being looked at, reviewed, assessed for efficacy and risk analysis, etc. Are we looking at one of my learnings from other places is one of the biggest things that you can do to reduce your carbon footprint is around solar panels. So if you own buildings, or indeed even if you lease them, there is a business case to be had around deployment of solar panels. Is that something we're looking at? Is that what we mean when we talk about decarbonisation in West Berkshire Community Hospital and PPH?
Okay, just come out. So the decarbonisation at West Berks is specifically around inefficient boiler replacement and moving to new heat pumps. We're looking potentially at an option around a solar array on a piece of land that we've got near that site as well. In terms of solar panels, we are sticking solar panels on every building we possibly can at the moment, if I'm being honest. So Early House, London House, Early House has already got them. London House will be getting them. Churchill House already has them. So we are maximising where we can on the estate we own and some of our leased estate. But the challenge is going to be what we do at the main sites. Let's say we've got plans in place at West Berks. PPH, because of what we're doing with the PFI provider at the moment, probably will be maybe 2 years down the line before we start really getting into looking at what we can do around, say, boiler replacement.
Yeah, I know it impacts the balance sheet, right, on the value of the property. So So in terms of funding, are we paying for that off balance sheet?
So in terms of the solar panels, we have a modest amount that we have within the capital program on an annual basis. So we're utilising that to purchase solar panels, and obviously there's a small level of efficiency and saving that will feed through into revenue positions as part of the plan next year.
Good, thank you for that, Paul. Cheers.
Thank you, Sally.
Alex, this might be a question for Nav. I don't know. The Mental Health Act project, if I recall correctly, when we looked at the figures for last year's detention at the Quality Assurance Committee, and that overall the numbers of people detained under Section 2 had declined significantly. And I wasn't sure whether we're saying here that the proportion of people, Black individuals, as numbers have declined, or the numbers overall who have been detained under Section 2 have declined. And if we are saying they're declined, what is it that we've done to make them decline? Because my understanding of the project is we've done a lot of analysis up to now, rather than put in particular actions. But it may be my misunderstanding, Alex, because obviously I'm dipping in every so often and haven't got, you know, the continuity that you've got, and no doubt Nav has got.
I mean, Nav might be able to give the overall Section 2 volume view, but the narrative in the strategy update is the absolute number of Black people detained has reduced. You're absolutely right that we said that there's been a lot of analysis and us getting the preparatory work in place for action, but there has also been significant awareness raising in the system around our focus, which may well have had an impact on rates. But we're not putting it down to any individual action at this stage. As a board, I would note it rather than link it directly to action. I think that's a fair position. I'm sure Minu would say the same. But Nav would welcome your views on that, and in particular the Section 2 overall. Is there a change in the Section 2 rates?
I think sort of my best understanding is that the numbers have gone down nationally as well. So I think sort of not just locally, but the numbers are sort of lower than they were perhaps a few years ago. So the numbers have gone down. But I think just in terms of the numbers at Prospect Park Hospital as well, because we sometimes sort of look at the numbers at Prospect Park Hospital, so the number of admissions are, of course, fewer as compared to what they were a few years ago, because the number of beds have gone down and so on and so forth. But I think that some of the numbers looked at within the detention project is a proportion of the people detained as well. Right. So I think those figures, I would imagine, sorry, I may have to sort of look at the data again, but I think my sense is that the proportion is also looked at. So regardless of the fact that the numbers have gone down, there's that sort of proportion that has sort of is looked at separately as well.
As a result of awareness raising rather than actions around that, because I was obviously going to go on and say, well, what actions have we taken, you know, for these results?
Yes. Detention, I think there are multiple factors that determine sort of when an individual gets detained, sort of starting from the journey at a very sort of when the illness develops to further sort of that care that they get and so on and so forth. So I think it's multifactorial. A lot of things have to sort of work together to address. And this the issues around sort of disproportionate detention, particularly in sort of Black individuals, is something that's long-standing, and it's multifactorial. So I think it's too early to say that one or two things have perhaps made a difference, but I think it's something that requires a concerted effort at all levels, and perhaps sort of starting much upstream. You know, what happens at the sort of very early stage when an individual presents, and what happens at the community level, and so on and so forth. Because sometimes when somebody has become too unwell, it perhaps is a bit too late to sort of reverse that. But what I would say is that it's multifactorial, and a lot of it is linked to sort of deprivation and other factors as well, in addition to the ethnicity as well. As you probably would imagine, that there's a lot of research done sort of nationally, and it's been going on for decades now. I think it's sort of research and things that have made a difference or not made a difference so far.
No,
so Sally, there are a number of actions that are recommended as part of our in-depth case reviews of people that have been detained, and that includes seeing that there hasn't been perhaps a psychological intervention specific for those cases that would have helped and that would have supported reducing the almost revolving Section 2 admissions. There is also the need to outreach into communities, huge amount of culturally sensitive work that we need to do, and specific work with the police around Section 136 and conveyance, and identifying alternative routes and support in the community. So as Nav said, lots to look at and focus on. And the Race and Health Observatory for the NHS is supporting our review of those actions to confirm they look sensible to begin to deploy. We expect to see that happening in the next quarter. And there is a partnership conference that the NHS Race and Health Observatory is sponsoring in the spring. We'll be able to see those actions coming forward, and would welcome board colleague attendance at that partnership.
Well, I'd be delighted to attend. As you can see, I'm following this closely. I mean, it is an important project. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Anything else? Julian, I was just pondering. I find these quite useful, these targets we've set, to guide us in terms of where we're going. I'm just still going back to my question about all the change that's going on in the NHS nationally and government policy, and whether there's any need to review the topics we're focusing on, or whether you think they're the topics that will still be relevant for the next sort of 12 months or so, because they're sort of core functions of a caring organisation. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I do, Martin. I think there will be a tweak required. I think I mean, to some extent, though, there's going to be some priorities, because the government is going to have to choose some of those things, and some of those will land well, and others we may be already quite good at. So it doesn't make much sense to say, look, we're already quite good. I mean, you're not really going to improve care locally. So I think the ones that we're already quite good at can just be in the performance framework, so we can see how we're doing against the national. I think the things we want to drive would be in this strategic sort of document. So I think we've got many of the things, hallmarks, I think, of where we do want to make progress. I mean, if you sense check them, there's none where you think, gosh, why are we even talking about that? And the last conversation being a sort of appetite in terms of that, really, because that mental health detentions, although it's a sort of cause of concern, will not be a national priority. But I do really think it's, it chimes with who we're at. Speaking to the team this morning, the national team, for mental health only, so not community services, there's going to be a smaller number of priorities associated with the mental health investment standard and the sort of productivity challenge. They're yet to be sort of confirmed, but it's a little bit more tricky in mental health, perhaps in physical healthcare. But they're talking about, in terms of productivity, the average length of stay in acutes, which is in acute mental health beds, which has gone up quite significantly by about 10 days over the last sort of 10 years. And then the associated issue of inappropriate out of area placements. I think we sort of support that, and it's obviously sort of ongoing work. They also talk about the sort of temporary staffing, reduction, particularly reduction of agencies, seen as been sort of a sort of key area of sort of productivity. So we will have to have a look at those sort of national sort of metrics to make sure that we've captured them, Martin. And it may be that there's a piece of work that's more strategic that would help us achieve those things that we look at in the strategy. But your question is, when the planning guidance comes out, will we review this? The answer is yes. But what we won't do is, I don't think it will be a revolution. I think it will just be a bit of an evolution. I think many of these things are sensible to me. When I read them, I thought, yeah, this is helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone got a different view? No? Okay. All right. Thanks so much then. Thank you, Alex, and great work going on there. And could you add me to the list on the mental health, the point that Sally made about diversity on mental health? Be good. Okay. Next item is a sort of a formal one. Appointment of new senior independent director. As you know, Naomi is sadly going to be leaving us. And thank you very much for all you've done, Naomi. But we have to appoint, as a consequence, a person as a senior independent director, which Naomi currently holds. And Julie has kindly put the sort of job spec, but it's largely to do with reporting on the performance of the chair, but also as an intermediary between the chair and the board, should that be necessary. I've discussed with Julie, and Aileen Feeney has kindly offered to do that, and it fits in with people's terms of office and etc. and other committee commitments. So I think, and the appointment has to be, it's decided by the board, but it has to be ratified by the governors. So I think I'm going to just suggest the board, is everyone content with Aileen taking on that role? I think it's still going to be work for Naomi because it's a complex process, as Naomi knows. So I don't envy her, but that'd be great. Thank you very much for that. And then we'll put it to governors for formal ratification. Julie, have I missed anything? No, I've read your notes perfectly. Okay, Councillor Governor's update. I've got nothing to have. I don't know whether we've had a much interaction over the Christmas period, so I've got nothing to report. Mark, I don't know whether you had anything that. No. Okay. Any other business? Okay. Next public board meeting is 11th of March, and we'll now consider our normal resolution to exclude the press and public from the remainder of the meeting.